Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. What's the closest you've ever come to death? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I got a severe ear infection that spread to my skull and neck. Was told it was an extremely rare case, that it only happened once before in Canada in the 90s, apparently. And the guy died. I got told the infection was extremely close to the main artery running up through my neck and into my brain, so meningitis and brain damage were hugely possible. I was told surgery was the only way, but it was extremely high risk and had a 90% mortality rate. I fully accepted that I was probably going to die and more or less said my goodbyes. The consultant changed their mind on surgery in the last half of an hour before it was due and took a gamble on a ridiculous combination of antibiotics. It worked, and I'm still alive. Half deaf in one ear, but still here. My jaw was completely seized up from a tooth infection that spread to the joint. I was too ill to move and couldn't swallow any foods or liquids because it was closing up my throat. I was slowly dehydrating to death and didn't even realize it because I spent 90% of the day asleep. I only found out when I went for a piss test, and it was brown and black. Got rushed to the hospital and straight into surgery. One evening I got a temperature of 41 plus and violent diarrhea and vomiting. I could not leave the bathroom on my own, so called the ambulance and went to the hospital. They treated the temperature symptoms first, and I asked to measure my pulse. I had a heart condition that made it overclock sometimes, so they hooked me up to the machine, and it showed 250. The look on Doc's face, though, she rushed away and brought someone else. That person gave me something and said it will help. The gradual change of expression, while there was no change at all on the monitor, that person went away and brought someone else with 2 syringes. She explained, I will inject this one first, and when I inject the second one, your job is to stay conscious. Ready? So after the second injection, the monitor instantly shows 50, and I start drifting away. I remember their voices speaking to me to make sure I do not pass out completely. Later, the initial doc said I scared the shit out of them. I was born dead, was almost a month late past term, and my mom hadn't had any signs of labor or anything to signal it was time. I was her first child. She went to her doctor and said the due date was past, and she was getting worried. They did an ultrasound, and I had no heartbeat. An emergency C-section was done, and my lungs had filled up with amniotic fluid and waste. I was put in the ICU, where my lungs were drained and waste was being treated for the infection from the waste. I got better. The short story is about 20 years ago I was on a work night in York, England. The group was camping close to the old decommissioned runway, as seen on Top Gear UK. After the night out, I came back to the camp in a taxi, steaming drunk. I asked if I could stop for a wee at the side of a country lane. My colleagues thought it would be hilarious to leave me stranded. I walked back to camp, cutting across the previously mentioned runway, and passed out. Meanwhile, my boss at the time thought it would be funny to see how quickly his new BMW M3 would get to 100 miles per hour, and decided to utilize the runway to find out, just like Top Gear. You can see where this is going. I woke up to the sound of screeching tires and the smell of petrol. As my eyes opened, the bumper of an M3 was directly above my face, and the tire an inch from my head. Thank you, BMW, for providing such an outstanding braking system. KCN is a salt. It's highly soluble in water and forms HCN and KOH when exposed to moisture in the air. HCN smells like oily almonds. If you can smell this, you're 50% of the 50% who have the gene to be able to, meaning that 50% of people in the world have a gene that will allow you to smell the gas, but only 50% of that 50% can truly smell it because of other genes that sort of cancel it out. When dissolved in water, KCN becomes CN and K. That CN will go directly to your cells and strip them of their ability to use oxygen. It takes an insanely small amount, so small that you wouldn't notice it. In 30 minutes, you fall down and die. HCN is much quicker, can kill you before you hit the floor. It's a gas. Think of 1/10 of a Joule puff, then divide it by 10, then do it again. That's how much it takes to kill you. And a majority of the world can't smell it. You can't see it. You can't do anything about it unless you're a lucky percent that can smell it. I was to run a sample test and get this purity of a customer sample of KCN needed for disposal. Well, that means I have to open the jar. When I did, a large cloud, remember, it's invisible, hits my face. It felt almost wet. It was that thick. So basically like 2 to 3 puffs from a Joule hit my face. I took 1/30th of a sniff. I'm talking about a microscopic sniff, and I smelled oily almonds. Just like that, I inhaled a lethal amount of HCN. I had seconds to live. I start getting tunnel vision. My ears are ringing. My knees are getting weak, and my heart is beating out of my chest. I'm drowning. Because again, my entire body is instantly not getting oxygen. I run away and start breathing as deep as I can. At this point, I either live or die. Miraculously, my tunnel vision goes away, and I start to become clear-headed. My small whiff was just below the threshold to effing end my life. That shit can kill you in less than a second. That is literally not an exaggeration at all. When you really have a genuine near-death experience, everything becomes very matter-of-fact. Even though my body was physically responding to the cyanide, cutting off oxygen to my body, insane heart rate, anxiety, loss of breath, I felt calm. I was aware that I was going to die at 9:30 a.m. on a Monday and began to think about how the moments would unfold after I died. When the tunnel vision started to clear and I could breathe again, I was taken from the matter-of-fact feeling straight into the anxiety and realization of how close I was to death. Death doesn't scare me so much anymore now. Our brains will comfort us if that time comes. Just do your best to avoid it. Oh, and don't smell insanely concentrated HCN gas. Went to the hospital in October with chest and abdominal pain. It turns out I had a duodenal ulcer. It took 4 days to find it, and I almost died a few times. 8 days in intensive care and 3 weeks in total to be released. 50 staples and gutted like a fish in the operating theater to get rid of sepsis and all the infection and nasties. Still in tremendous pain all this time later, and now awaiting either heart stents or bypass. Barely any sick pay from my job and struggling to survive. The worst thing now is the pain still, but the mental side of things. Head-on car crash into a tree, no seatbelt. Somehow I managed to walk away with just a broken shoulder and bicep. I was knocked out for a good while, but what woke me up was my Apple Watch indicating crash detection and if I wanted the police to come or not. I chose not to, LOL. Happened 2 years ago. To this day, I still think about how my legs and head are still on my body. They cut the tree down because I split it in half, but 90% of my body was fine. It was a total mind F. A lot of these really just emphasize the fact that the human body is truly amazing, how fragile it can be, but also how resilient it is. So take care of yours. You only get one, for most of us. Many times as a kid or baby, but the one I remember was the bacterial lung infection at 12 years old. I woke up at night with a high fever and couldn't breathe. I also have asthma, and my typical asthma medications didn't work anymore. I peed in my bed because I couldn't stand up and called for help. My stepdad came, called my mother, and she came home from her late shift and drove me to the hospital. The doctor said I was the sickest kid there currently, and maybe they needed to remove one side of my lung. Yeah, that's really motivating. Thanks, Doc. I was there for 6 weeks, lost a lot of school days, and needed to repeat the class. I am almost a germaphobe now. I had a pulmonary embolism, passed out 3 times at home prior to going to the ER, received great treatment at the hospital. While in intensive care, a doctor told me that my organs were shutting down upon arrival at the hospital, and I was most likely seconds away from death. One of the times I passed out at home, I hit my head on a table when falling. My wife found me on the floor with a laceration on my forehead. Out of silence or blackness, I heard my name being called repeatedly, faintly. It got a tiny bit louder with each repetition. I realized my wife was calling me. I heard the stress in her voice. I believed I had to get to her because she had some sort of emergency. After many repetitions of my name, I woke and saw her. I'm not sure, but I think that silent blackness that I first heard my name being called was my closest point of death. I remember lying in my basement in 2005, breathing heavily, muscles screaming. Every fiber of me knew I was dying. I had lost 35 pounds a month prior. I had started to slowly go blind. My tongue had sores on it, a defeated pile of skin and bones. I lay on the floor of my cold apartment. It was the summer of 2005, at the peak of the heat. No health insurance, just lost my job, $200 left in my bank account. There I was, an undiagnosed diabetic. All I could see was light and blurry color, no definition or outlining feature. A week later, after my fiancé finally got me health insurance through the state, I was on the road to recovery. I had a 25-pound mass growing inside my ovary that grew and pushed all my organs around, essentially making me look pregnant. It had been growing progressively since I was maybe 17. I'm 22 now. I had the surgery right before my 22nd birthday. We named him Cletus, the fake fetus. Had a laparotomy done. Spent 4 days in the hospital. It took 2 months to even get into the surgery, with many ER trips. I even had one in an ambulance due to not being able to move. I was in agony. Honestly, it changed my life. I lost 50 pounds after the surgery. Cletus made my whole body swell everywhere. Got run over by a tractor trailer on my bike, riding alongside a semi on the curb side of a commercial street at about 15 miles per hour. The truck swung into a driveway, and I ended up under the deck of the trailer on the ground. I somehow unclipped from my pedals and rolled backwards into a standing position, just in time to watch the rear wheels of the trailer roll over my bicycle. I am not a natural athlete, and I was new to clipless pedals, but on that day, I reacted with incredible coordination and speed. I was completely unscathed. It was Friday the 13th, a lucky day for me. Black ice on the highway in Vancouver. If you know the West Coast, you know folks here are hopeless at driving in snow or icy conditions. Guy in front of me and I both felt the ice and slowed down. The person beside us proceeded to pass me, but the car was almost sideways by the time they got by me. Clipped the guy in front, both cars went into a spin, and I managed to slip between them before pulling over to help. That wasn't the almost dead part. While figuring out if we could push the one guy's car out of the ditch or needed a tow, a third car came sliding along, smashed into the initial car, and slid down into the ditch near me. Dude was out cold with a huge lump on his head, so being a first aid person, I began an assessment and called 911 as there was now an injury involved. Finished the assessment, hung up with 911, and heard someone yell, "Look out!" For first aid folks, it turns out the scene was not safe, but I still would have tried to help if it happened again. The fourth car, sliding off the highway at full speed, like 90 km/h, just ripped down into the ditch and took out myself and the person who slid by me initially. I had time to turn my body slightly and took the front headlight area right off the butt or hip area, popped me up in the air, and I ragdoll flew about 40 meters over the top of the other guy and his car. I actually remember sort of making eye contact as I flew over him, landed face first in the mud and tall grass, never lost consciousness, had the wind knocked out of me, bruised a bunch of internal organs, but somehow not even any serious injuries or broken bones. Spent about 4 days in the hospital while they monitored the bruised internal stuff. Was purple from my chest down to my knees, but holy doodle was I lucky with that one. I even walked to the ambulance with a firefighter on each arm. The other person that got hit survived too, and they flew about 60 to 70 meters, but had to get dropped to the hospital. But the cops later told me they made it and would basically make a full recovery. A few angels hanging out on the Trans-Canada Highway that day. A long time ago, I cut myself during high school lunch. Almost bled out in the gas station bathroom down the road. I cut myself without looking since I was walking alongside friends, and I had my hands in my front hoodie pocket, and it was really deep and jagged. I probably nicked an artery or something because I'd been cutting a lot before that. But I never bled that much in my entire life. Sat in the bathroom for what felt like hours holding those shitty brown paper towels on my wrist, scared as hell I was going to pass out and not be able to keep pressure anymore. The most distinct memory for me was the yellow hue of the lights and the humming of the fan and how unreal everything felt at that moment. I was so dizzy and lightheaded, it felt like a bad dream. I ditched school and walked home, not sure exactly how long I was in there. I don't even remember walking home. I still have the scar, and it was the last time I ever self-harmed. Threw those clothes away since they were literally drenched in my blood, and that would not be the easy thing to explain to my parents. Almost dying in a gas station bathroom is a very enlightening experience. I have been electrocuted twice in my life. Once during the snow, I plugged in a wet extension cord in an old house with no ground. I was pretty typical electrocution until the breaker kicked. The second time was with 220, which was done over an old paper type fuse I was replacing. That one left my right hand black afterward and knocked me off the dryer I was leaning on. Good times. I don't recommend trying. I was a fireman for 20 years and have several stories of near death, but there are 3 that are burned into my memory. All 3 times I was doing entry on a burning structure. The first that always comes to mind is the time I fell to a floor and ended up on a first floor. I effed up my knee, hamstring, and hip on that one. Ended up having to gather myself up and get out of the burning building. The second time was oxygen bottles exploding. The whole side of the bottle exploded. I believe they call that bleave. Got several stitches on my face on that one. The third time was the wind changed as we were going through the back door. I watched my Glowflex melt and turnout gear turn pink. The seals in the air pack actually melted. Sent my helmet back to the manufacturer because they wanted to see the pinhole on top of it. Oh yeah, I forgot about the time I got exposed to an unknown chemical mixed with hydrochloric acid. That one ended up funny. I got stripped naked and hosed off in a helicopter pad. Moving on to medical emergencies, went into anaphylactic shock after being stung by a bee. Got tunnel vision from that before the ER could get meds in me. Then I had a weird heart incident with my heart going to over 250 beats a minute. They have a weird term for that. They ended up stopping my heart, had heart surgery to fix that. One time I had bullets whiz by me. Thank God they weren't shooting at me, just in the wrong alley at the wrong time.